I like to think of it in terms of a bridge, a footbridge. If it has no handrails on it, it's very scary to walk across a deep ravine, but you put some handrails there and you can run across that footbridge because there's a sense of freedom. And same with our children. If you've got the handrails on the bridge of life, the values that have been established, and the principles of living, then the child feels free to go the journey across that bridge of life.
Family Life Australia presents Marriage and Family Life, a program of practical advice and encouraging stories to bring you hope and to enrich your marriage and family life.
Joining me in the studio today are Dr. Ian and Dr. Helene Richardson. They both are teachers and counselors and, most importantly, parents. And that's what we're going to talk to them about today, styles of parenting. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be with you.
Okay, parents, 5 children, is that right?
Yes, 5 children.
Our eldest just turned 37.
Okay, so you've been in the parenting game for a while.
Yes.
Okay, and you're passing on your wisdom to others, and I'm very thankful for that. Recently, I listened to your parenting seminar, and you talked about the different styles of parenting, and we're going to walk through those in just a few moments. But before we get to the different styles of parenting, I wanted to ask you about how you started off your parenting seminar. You kind of said that each of the parents should picture their child at 20 years old and what you want them to be ideally at that age.
Yep.
Now, why did you start off that way?
I think parents don't have a long-term goal. They look at this child and they go in the moment, never thinking about what a child might turn out to be. And I think a lot of parents too are quite lenient when the child is young, and then find that when they get to teenage years, their children are running amok and they don't know how to rein them in, but it's too late. So you actually need to know when they're young what values you want to instill in them, so that when they come to those troubled years, they've got some values that they can fall back on.
And as Proverbs says, train up a child in the way he should go, so that when he's old, he'll not depart from it. If you don't know what the old is, how are you going to train them up to get there? What are you going to train them to be? So it's not about professions. And some cultures and some people are more concerned about what professions their children are going to be. But what we're talking about here and what the scripture talks about for us is character, how we want our children to be, not what we want our children to be in terms of
Occupation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted children who were honest, who had integrity, who could stand up for themselves, who could love other people as well as themselves. So those kinds of things we started to try and instill into our children.
But you're not going to get there unless you actually picture that ideal to strive for.
That's right.
Now, in your styles of parenting, you teach that different styles will have different outcomes.
That's right.
Oh, it's kind of scary when you think about it. We can affect the outcome when they're young adults.
And we as parents are models to our children. So inevitably what we do and how we respond to them is how they're going to turn out the other end as well. And too often parents are willing to say what to do, but do something different themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Children learn by seeing more than hearing.
That's right. That's a humbling thought, but we as parents have tremendous influence. Okay, we're going to walk through 4 different styles of parenting. We're going to start off with the most dysfunctional, kind of the don't let this happen to you, and kind of work our way up to the ideal, the most balanced one.
Or if you find yourself in this situation, then you need to find some help.
That is a good point, yes. So we all are short of the ideal, but hopefully knowing what the ideal is can help us on our journey. Okay, so probably the worst case scenario of don't let this happen to you is the uninvolved parent. And before we even get to that, we should picture 2 continuums. Well, one extreme is a very unresponsive parent, and the other extreme is a very responsive parent. And the other continuum is demanding and undemanding. So if somebody is an uninvolved parent, they would be very undemanding of their children and very unresponsive. Is that the case?
Yeah, well, that's the 2 worst extremes, the undemanding and unresponsive parent. I was just thinking about this and thinking that there are a couple of ways you can be uninvolved. You can be so involved in what you're doing yourself that you're not involved with your child. Or there are those parents who have had abuse in their own backgrounds who have not had responsive and demanding parents themselves, who have been damaged, and they become unresponsive and undemanding of their children. And they back off. They don't respond when the child needs help. They don't respond when the child is hungry. And so the child grows up in pain too.
Okay, so how this works in practical reality, say the child of an uninvolved parent comes home and has a terrible school mark. An uninvolved parent, just indifferent, or how would they respond?
Probably wouldn't care.
Yeah, wouldn't care about it.
Whatever.
The poor grade is probably due to the undemandingness of the parent as well, in some respects.
Okay, so they're just being taught that good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't really matter.
And not having any involvement with the child in the child's life. So there's this sense of separatedness from the child. I think of that because we all make mistakes in all of these areas, throughout. There's no such thing as the perfect parent. And I think of a time when I was so busy in ministry that I just didn't have time for the children. And one of our children, we found them sitting down in the kitchen and so detached from me, wanting my attention but not getting it. And I caught them with the scissors in their pyjamas, ready to cut a big hole in them.
Oh, wow.
And I was just about ready to be the...
Very demanding?
The very demanding.
Yes.
And realised, oh, hang on, he's doing this because they want my attention, not because they're trying to be naughty here. I had to really take a back step and say, gosh, I haven't had the responsiveness to my kids because I've been so busy doing everything else, helping other people.
Preparing a sermon on love?
Yeah, one time preparing my sermon on love, and one of my kids came in, Dad, want to play cricket? Haven't got time to play cricket. Dad, want to play cricket? Can't you see I'm so busy preparing this message on love?
It's interesting how we can fall into those traps. So it sounds like indifference is almost like a form of abuse in a way.
Yes, it is. Neglect is one of the worst forms of abuse. Yeah.
And talking about outcomes, if you want a 20-year-old who is happy and healthy, obviously this is not the approach to parenting. So what type of outcome do you usually have if you're an indifferent, uninvolved parent?
There could be a couple of extremes. You could have a very depressed child, or you could have a very angry child. They will often end up with very poor grades at school, often end up on drugs. They would be often the kids who are on the streets and don't go home.
Every child needs love, acceptance, forgiveness, nurture. The unresponsive parent gives none of that.
They're striving for that.
They're striving for it, and they grow up with this deficiency. And hence, if they haven't been nurtured, they don't know how to nurture anybody else, and they don't know how to nurture themselves. And so then they get into codependent relationships later on because they're looking for somebody else to give to them what they need to be able to give to themselves, and we only learn that from the way our parents respond to us.
Every child needs to be attended to when their nappies are wet or dirty, when they're hungry, when they've hurt themselves, and an unresponsive parent often will be unaware of that child's need. And so an attachment to the parent doesn't develop properly, and then they don't learn to regulate their emotions properly. They don't learn how to think properly through situations, so they just grow up living in the moment and very impulsive.
And sometimes it's not the parent's fault. I mean, if
No.
there's a member of the family dying of cancer,
Yes.
obviously all the attention goes to the sick
Yes.
member of the family, and then unintentionally you just neglect a child.
So there's a range of scenarios, isn't there, as to how this could happen.
But if you think in terms of the pendulum, when the pendulum swings one way, it needs to come back to centre again. So there are times when we can't be responsive because of certain situations, as you're just talking about, and the pendulum has swung out to the side, but it's really important that the pendulum comes back to centre again, and that we provide that responsiveness that our children need.
And the thing is that any of us at any time can drift into that.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a good lesson for
In fact,
us.
we could say that we all do.
Yes, I think that's a pretty safe assumption there. Now let's move to the next style of parenting, a little bit healthier, but still not quite there. That would be the permissive parent. So they would be undemanding.
But very responsive.
But very responsive. So going back to the scenario of the child coming home with a poor mark from school, probably high marks weren't demanded of them, wasn't expected.
They'd probably be told, oh, that's okay, you'll do better next time or whatever, maybe don't worry too much about it. And they have few limits on their children, let their children do whatever they want.
And no expectation for the child to fulfil their potential. Just allow whatever will be, will be.
Okay, so not demanding, but very responsive. So if that child is sad about it or feels it's unfair, that mark, they would be very responsive to that.
Yes.
Yeah. And may then try and wrap their child in cotton wool and protect them and look after them.
May go to the school
Yeah.
and blame the school.
Okay, so that's not a good thing. But at least there's an element of caring and nurturing, and sometimes these parents are kind of buddy-buddy.
Yes.
Yeah, they're like best friends with their kids.
They don't want their children to not love them. Usually that's a motivation. They think if they're demanding, they might lose their child's love, but that's usually not the case.
Okay, so that's another example of don't let that happen to you, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Yes, it
that
is.
they care
Yes.
and are very responsive to any discomfort on the part of the child. The child knows that they're loved.
That's right. But they'll often still end up in high school not doing well and maybe running with the crowd or trying drugs as well.
Because the demandingness is the part that creates the values or sets the values that are there. And the child growing up with the responsiveness but not the demandingness, they know they're loved but they have no values.
Okay, and so the outcomes, just not really striving for high standards.
Not striving for anything and not really...
Lose their way.
Very easily lose their way.
So that's the permissive style. Better, but still not as healthy as you could be.
Yes.
We're talking to Dr. Ian and Dr. Helene Richardson, two doctors in the house today on the program talking about styles of parenting. We're working through 4 different ones. We have 2 more to go, 2 more that are demanding. And we demand that you stay tuned because we have a lot more for you on today's edition of Marriage and Family Life.
You're listening to Marriage and Family Life, presented by FamilyLifeAustralia.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can email us info@FamilyLifeAustralia.com or use our toll-free number 1800 358 6329.
And welcome back to Marriage and Family Life, where we're talking about styles of parenting with Dr. Ian and Dr. Helene Richardson. They are both teachers, counselors, and parents. Ian has a doctor's degree in ministry, majoring in counseling, and Helene has a PhD in psychology. So they certainly have studied this topic, but most importantly, they have a PhD in life, being parents of 5 children. So continuing our conversation about styles of parenting and the outcomes from the various styles of parenting, we should say just at the outset here that these are general tendencies. There's always exceptions.
Yeah. We also need to remember, too, there's no such thing as a perfect parent.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that, because we can really beat ourselves up if we kind of get into one of these styles, and we can fluctuate between any of these.
Yes, we do. In fact, we tend to utilize all of them, and sometimes we just use the wrong one at the wrong time as well.
Okay, we're going to move toward another one, which is very common, and a lot of times it's a response to the permissive style. Before the break, we were talking about the permissive style, where not really a whole lot is expected from the child, but the parent is very responsive to the child's needs. Now, a lot of times we respond to that saying, hey, there's got to be standards, let's raise the bar, and then you become a demanding parent. So isn't that just a great thing? Isn't that the answer to all these problems in parenting? If unresponsive and undemanding leads to problems, then let's just be demanding and authoritarian. Is that a good thing?
No, it's not.
Why did you leave out the responsiveness then, hey?
Oh, did I? Because that was not convenient for it. But that is a good point.
Demanding without responsiveness or without love, or the child doesn't feel love, they will respond and they will usually do what they're told. But eventually, with no love, they get angry on the inside and they might do really well at school, but then they count down the days till they can leave home.
And the demanding without responsiveness is all about control. It's not about the child, but it's really about the parent being in control of the child and the child doing whatever is demanded of the child. And that's very damaging to the child as they grow.
So the good part is actually having a standard that you're
Yes.
demanding or striving for your children to achieve.
Yes.
And you expect that, and they know it's expected of them.
Yes.
But the bad part is not being responsive if there's a problem.
Yes.
So if that
or
child...
even being told that you're not good enough, I can't love you unless you do this. And I know that some parents may do that.
Oh, conditional love?
Conditional love, yes.
Yeah, the manner in which the demandingness is put into place. And it's not in the context of caring and nurture and love, it's in the context of control.
Well, or another bad motive would be our family is about appearances.
Yes.
And we want to look good.
Yes.
So you better obey because we don't want to appear bad to other people.
Yes. And then when the children start to rebel, that's when they get brought to us.
Oh, yeah, as counselors.
And parents
You have to fix them.
bring their teenagers in and say, you know, they expect us to tell their teenage children, you've got to obey your parents. And the interesting thing is when I get them all together and the parent is telling me how bad their child is, I get them to reflect on what they were like when they were that age.
What goes around comes around.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so if somebody, their parenting style is all about obey, 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 and not responsive to what's going on inside of that child, then they just kind of, well, how do they react?
Well, like our 4 or 5-year-old sitting on the floor chomping up his pyjamas. They can start to do things to try and attract attention. So you can have quite a symptomatic child in a family who the parents think this child is doing terrible things, but they're only a symptom of a bigger picture usually.
And whenever we're put under tight controls, the natural thing is to break away from those controls. And so the demanding parent, without the connection of love and nurture associated with it, the child wants to get out of there. And so actually I guess you could say the child will do one of two things. The child will become so submissive to the control of the parents that the child doesn't become a person in their own right, or the child breaks away from their family of origin and doesn't want anything to do with the parent, goes into rebellion and specifically doing things that they know the parent wouldn't want them to do.
I don't know how many people I've had come to me say my dad was so authoritarian and so controlling. I couldn't wait to get out of there. When I turned 17, I left home. And, of course, then they say I married early. And then, of course, who do they marry? Another man quite like their dad.
And why is that? Why would you go right from one problem to the same problem?
Well, I guess that the husband seems caring to start with. But then we tend to look for what was comfortable when we were younger. And then we find the same thing again.
Well, right back to the same problem.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the authoritarian style. Has some good qualities, but ultimately, if it's carried to the extreme, can really mess up a child.
Yeah, they can end up with depression or can end up angry and leave home, depending on their temperament too.
And if that child is really feeling frustrated at something's unfair, and the response is, well, no response.
Well, I said so you have to do it.
That really messes up a child.
Yes. There are times... Sorry.
Go on.
There are times when a parent has to say, that's the way it is and that's the way it's going to be. You have to just trust me that it has to be this way. But there are other times when it doesn't need to be like that. And a child will soon know that you're fair. But if you come down all the time and say, well, I said so you have to do it, then they will in the end react in some way to that.
Because in life there are extenuating circumstances.
Yes.
Maybe you didn't get a good grade because you have a learning disability.
Yes.
And if you're punished for that, well, obviously you're going to feel you're hard done by.
Yes.
Or maybe you didn't get a good grade because the expectation was so high and you felt you could never measure up to what was expected, so you don't try.
What's the point in trying?
What's the point? And this whole control thing, Eric, really comes out of fear. When parents are afraid for their children, they tend to become more controlling. In fact, anybody who tries to control is actually motivated out of fear. And so the fear for the child tends to want to put in controls, but also the fear for one's own reputation puts in controls on the children. some of our cultures, shame on the family is to be avoided at all cost, and hence in those cultures the rules and the boundaries, the controls are very, very strict. But then, of course, the children break out of them and bring the shame that's trying to be avoided.
Yeah, so you get the very thing that you were trying to avoid.
That's right.
Yes. I realised partway through the parenting, probably towards the end, and I should have realised this a lot earlier, is that we do tend to parent out of our fears. And when we do have the fears, we tend to put very strict fences around our kids, no walls really, just so that they don't end up like we hope they don't end up.
And now, finally, we've learned things not to do. The very best, healthiest style of parenting, it's what you call the authoritative style.
Yes.
How does that differ from authoritarian?
The parent in the authoritative style is responsive as well. So they respond to the child's needs, they listen to the children, they adapt their own needs and desires when they can talk to the children and listen to the child's point of view. So doesn't always go the parent's way. So they set the boundaries, they are demanding, but they are also responsive. They love the children.
The authoritative parent establishes values for the family, but in the context of establishing those values, they understand the child. So there is acceptance of the child as they are, there is the nurture of the child as they are, the protection of the child, but not the smothering of the child. So there's the sense of freedom within the home, but yet the boundaries have been set in place. I like to think of it in terms of a bridge, a footbridge. If it has no handrails on it, it's very scary to walk across a deep ravine, but you put some handrails there and you can run across that footbridge because there's a sense of freedom. And same with our children. If you've got the handrails on the bridge of life, the values that have been established, the principles of living, then the child feels free to go the journey across that bridge of life. If the handrails are too close in and the child is smothered by them, then they don't want to go across that bridge. If they're not there at all, then it's too scary a journey for them.
Okay, so we need to have a healthy balance between being demanding and being responsive.
Yes, we do.
And where do we find a good example of that?
Best example of all is with God. God as a heavenly Father. First, He gave us life, and that's what we as parents do. We give life to our children. He then nurtures us. He loves us unconditionally, just as we are. He provides for us. He protects us. He establishes boundaries for us or values for us. He sets us into relationship and shows us, demonstrates to us how relationship can work and how we can work in that relationship. And He goes the journey with us. He's always there, but He never controls. Once having set the principles in place, He leaves us to outwork those and to discover ourselves in the midst of them.
He lets us make mistakes.
Yeah, and He doesn't beat us over the head with a 4x2 because we've made mistakes.
So He's nurturing, responsive, and also demanding,
But
has
he-
a standard
yes.
as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Because He wants what's best for us. We're
Yes.
His children.
That's right.
I think that's a good place to end, and that's a good ideal for us all to strive for if we want to have that outcome of a happy, healthy, well-adjusted child
Yes.
when they're 20 years old. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Eric.
Our guests today have been Dr. Ian and Dr. Helene Richardson. They're both counselors, and you can find out more information about their ministry at lifebuilders.org.au. That's www.lifebuilders.org.au. Thanks for joining us today, and we invite you to join us again next time for another edition of Marriage and Family Life.
Marriage and Family Life has been brought to you by FamilyLife Australia. We hope the program has encouraged you in your marriage and family life. For more information or to listen to this program again online, our website is FamilyLife Australia, that's all one word, .com. Once there, click on Marriage and Family Life from the radio menu. If you have any questions or comments, you can email us at info@familylifeaustralia.com or use our toll-free number 1800 358 6329. Thanks for listening, and please join us again for Marriage and Family Life, presented by FamilyLife Australia, helping people find love that lasts.